All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other in Zoom nowadays. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, Chris, thank you for having me on the show today. So my name is Nick Casares. I'm the head of product at a company called Step3. Step3, we're a startup in the Web3 space. And what we're driving towards is helping marketers and businesses rethink their approach to things like membership and loyalty rewards, but using a different spin. So we're in the Web3 space. NFTs, which I'm sure we can get into that further along in the conversation, but using this idea of digital ownership and digital items that consumers, customers, fans, and loyalists can use to kind of get access to new ways to engage with the brand, to unlock community perks, et cetera. My personal background, I've been with Step3 for the past 5 years. We actually started life. Our team got together around blockchain incubation. So we ran an incubator for a short period of time and incubated some early stage ideas, and eventually gravitated towards playing in the NFT space and eventually kind of entering the MarTech space, as it were. I come from a background in design thinking, in product management, and user experience design. So I started my career more on the creative side, and as technology evolved, and this was 15 years ago, so I was coming up when apps and more complex websites were starting to be the norm, and so I had an opportunity to really cut my teeth on thinking through how do you design a great experience, and eventually worked with a bunch of companies at different types of verticals and different types of products on really trying to create great user experiences. I think every person who's ever worked in UX will come along or come to a point in their career where they want to have a little bit more influence on the product. Mm-hmm. It's this kind of tension between product management and user experience, and so I had an opportunity.
UX people should be just calling the shots, right? They know better.
Well, they want to, right? We need both. We need both. We need engineering, UX, product. It's that trifecta. But along the way to getting into product, I had an opportunity to kind of cross over the fence into product management. Which is what I did, and really started getting my hands around product management.
Oh, you went over to the dark side, did you?
I don't know. Went to the dark side, yeah.
Put on the Sith helmet. You have a red lightsaber now.
oh, trust me, I got plenty of flack from my design coworkers who were like, "What are you sold out? What are you doing?"
I bet.
Yeah. So that was a fun time to transition. I had to build a whole new skill set around product management. It's a totally different animal, in some ways.
Oh yeah.
But that really was the springboard for my career into product. And so for the past probably 7 or 8 years, I've been completely focused on product management and product strategy. During that time, I've had the opportunity to work in internal incubators in medium-sized companies, really thinking about like greenfield opportunities. I've also worked for a couple of startups during that time, again, across different verticals, and just had a lot of time and opportunity to really kind of ideate on the early stage side of building products, which is a fun pace to play. It's where I like to spend my time. There's a lot of opportunity there.
No, it's the best. It's absolutely the best environment. I mean, the only downside is I just find sometimes all these companies find it very difficult to actually get these things out the door, right? I mean, it's fun to play
100%.
with. POCs are great. But then when time comes to, well, this is a fantastic product and we see a market for it, but how do we take it out? Right? How do we turn it into something? And I think that's where a lot of companies stumble, right, in that space.
Absolutely. I've had the opportunity to work in both a raw startup, which, when you're a raw startup, I mean, your sole mission is in life is to find product market fit, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
you have no hesitation about trying to commercialize your idea. Yeah. However, on the internal incubator side, there is this interesting tension. So you're buried within the organization. You may or may not have resources, and you're trying to basically create, evangelize and build support for ideas that may be at odds with other parts of the business.
Oh yeah,
right?
and usually are.
Yeah, if you're doing it the right way, right? It's that disruptor mentality. But it is a much different experience when you're trying to win support and resources for taking that idea to the next stage. You're right. So trying to get to that next commercial level is definitely challenging.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, it's nice and comfy because you have the rest of the organization funding you, because it's different from a raw startup with a runway, right? Where you got to go, we got to make this happen. Otherwise we're dead. or but then you're in within the organization, you're almost too comfortable and like, we can come up with all these different ideas, and if they don't go anywhere, that's fine. We just say we innovated. But eventually somebody will say, wait a minute, what did these guys do? what have they what have they
Absolutely.
done?
Right.
I mean, are you still a cost center? Come on, what's going on here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then, there's the inevitable conflict with the cash cow part of the business, which
Yep,
is probably, on the other side of adoption. And that's why you're probably looking for new things. And
exactly.
it's like, do we want to introduce this new emergent thing to our customer base and potentially cannibalize
Yeah.
our business unit? So interesting role to play in.
So what drew you into the Web3 space? I mean, first of all, I guess, can you explain your product and
Absolutely.
how it works?
Yeah. So
And
we're
then you can tell me
building.
about how you drew it, what drew you into the space.
Sure, sure. So
Okay.
we're building it's a Web3 SaaS platform essentially, and this
Hmm.
platform is really designed for marketers and businesses, but also creator communities. So in the Web3 space and that whole narrative, there's a really strong movement around the creator economy, around community co-creation, and so we've got a pretty broad target right now because we know that there are a lot of different types of personas that are trying to get into the space. But where we see the space going really is brands, evidence out there for this are things like Starbucks, things like Reddit, who have launched these pretty successful pilot programs around loyalty and reward programs
Hmm.
and being able to supplement loyalty and rewards with additional perks, more akin to a membership.
Right.
So our product is a platform that lets brands, creators, marketers basically reward the holders of their NFTs. So if they have
Hmm.
NFTs out there in the world, whether that's a membership NFT, a loyalty NFT, if you're a sports organization, it could be a fan NFT. We have a platform that lets you create a really nice branded experience where you can create redeemable rewards for your audiences. So these could be
Hmm.
things like real life merchandise. These could be discount codes, gated access to content. We can do things like event passes for IRL events. And we've got a whole backlog of different reward types that'll be coming out through the rest of the year that we think are an opportunity for brands and marketers to create a much more engaging customer experience as they put these things together. I think one of the interesting things about just consumer behavior is that everything has become hyper commoditized, right?
Hmm.
All of our experiences, all of our products, they're so interchangeable because you just go to the web, you go to Amazon, you flip one out for the other.
Yep.
Everybody's trying to capture our attention.
Hmm.
And so I think brands are really looking for an opportunity to start having deeper and more meaningful conversations with their audiences.
Right.
Nike is doing this with their Nike.swoosh approach. They're creating this platform and really structuring it around community co-creation. And we think there's a real opportunity here in this next generation of marketers where they're going to be leaning into this idea of community engagement and looking for those tools to create these rewarding customer journeys.
Right. Can you explain how? So it sounds a bit like a customer buys an NFT, and then you're adding value to that NFT. Is that correct? Is that
100%.
high
Yeah,
level?
that's
So if I were a new customer, or say I'm another chain like Starbucks, and I'm coming to you and I'm saying, do I already have to have the NFT infrastructure in place and sell those NFTs before you guys come in, or can you actually help me sell NFTs to my customers?
We do both. We do
Hmm.
both. And so we can create custom experiences to be able to sell or mint those NFTs for your customers,
Hmm.
to kind of that would be the, kind of kickstarting your membership program.
Right.
Or if you already have a collection, maybe you've been playing in this space for a little while, we can bring those into the platform so you can create reward programs for that existing audience.
Right. So let's backtrack a second to people who don't understand anything about any of this, because there's lots of people out there who still don't get Web3. Like,
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
would I want to create an NFT? I mean, I think people understand. Maybe you can explain what an NFT is first, and
Sure.
then why would people want to create an NFT as opposed to some other kind of loyalty program?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with what is an NFT. So an NFT, it is essentially a digital item that is tracked. The ownership of that digital item is tracked on a blockchain. So let me
Hmm.
unpack that a little bit because there's a couple of key things there. So ownership is an interesting thing to think about in a digital world. So today we log into a lot of things, we get access to a lot of things, but we don't really own any digital items. Nothing in our digital lives is really owned. Even
Yeah.
your files, they're a Google Doc somewhere. They're
Hmm.
on somebody else's server. They're
Yeah.
controlled by a third party. And so the ability to own digital items is a new way of thinking about building out our digital assets. And
Hmm.
so an NFT it's this digital item that can be owned, and it's tracked on a blockchain. Now, blockchain technology, without getting way down into the weeds, is interesting because it allows us to track transactions in an open way that anybody can access. And so we have this shared public ledger, and now we can immediately and easily see when a digital asset is transferred from one party to another. So it's a great way to track ownership.
Right.
NFTs then are really they're a digital slate or a digital palette, right? An NFT today, if you go to the news, you're going to see pictures of monkey JPEGs and all of these,
Yeah.
crazy
It's usually
overpriced.
assigned to an image, right? It's usually,
Right.
it's like,
That's the original use case, and that's how it
yeah.
got started. Is there these images? However, that's just one piece of digital information. An NFT can represent an audio file, a video file, a credential, a title to an in real life, physical object.
Hmm.
So NFTs are really just a medium, and they're a way for us to attach ownership of that thing to a blockchain, which then can be seen by the rest of the world.
So how is this? So like if somebody's coming from the world of files and documents,
Sure.
it's like a Word doc which sits on your computer, but it cannot be changed, or an MP3 file. So back in the olden days when people used to buy stuff from iTunes, they would just download an MP3 file. And an MP3
Sure.
file, you would own that MP3 file, even though you could make copies of it. It was locked in some way that you couldn't copy. There was copyright protection, et cetera, on it. So how is this different from that kind of copyright protection on a digital asset?
So this is kind of getting back to the interesting thing about blockchains. With a digital file, I can download an image and I can copy that thing 1,000 times, and I can
Yeah,
email it to my
spread it all
entire
over the
network.
internet until
Yeah,
Getty Images starts yelling at you. So
absolutely, yeah. What blockchain introduces, though, is this unique ability to track that. And so now we can say, well, there is this single digital item, and it's owned by this person. And blockchain is pseudonymous, so it's not necessarily it's owned by Nick, but
yeah.
there's a what's called a wallet address that's attached to me. And on the blockchain, we can see that I own that. And when I transfer that, we can see that I transfer that. So if I
Mhm.
were to try to copy that and transfer it, number one, the copies wouldn't have that same ownership verification. So it would be instantly apparent that those are counterfeits, they're
Right.
frauds.
Mhm.
And if I sent it to everybody else, by email or something, the record of that sending transaction wouldn't exist on the blockchain. So when it comes to verifying, well, does Nick's friend own that image or that NFT? There's no transaction associated with it. So
Right.
it's essentially a fraudulent transfer or a fraudulent purchase.
Right. So is this kind of DRM basically? It's kind of like super DRM.
It's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, there's actually there's a movement around music with
Superpowered digital rights management, right?
yeah. There's this idea happening in the music world. Music is my side passion, and so there's as
Isn't it
musicians,
everybody's? I mean, come on.
it's true. We're
Music is
yeah.
great, but
So
you can't make any money at it. No, I was kidding.
no, that's very true.
It's almost everybody's side hustle, right? But they don't like my SoundCloud. Nobody's listening to my SoundCloud stuff. No, I'm just
Nope.
kidding.
We've just conceded defeat. It's a hobby.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, so there's this idea that we can start using NFTs to carry music, and
Right.
so now maybe I'm an artist and I have 1,000 copies of my track, and I'm going to let people purchase that track. What's missing actually today is for that to work well.
Mhm.
There's no like web player, there's no audio player that understands that ownership and will accept or reject the playback based on the
Right.
ownership. So
Right.
I do think that that's coming. I think we're going to see a version of that where technology does go full circle, where DRM is going to come back in an interesting new form. I think what's different this time is that it's not controlled by a central authority. It's not
Right.
iTunes who's letting you authorize your device and then you can play music. It's you, again, digitally owning something, having that track, having that ownership, and being able to plug that in and play your music.
Yeah, it's more like it's an analog to a physical ownership. So I buy a coffee mug or I buy a CD, or this CD has the track on it, so I actually physically own the CD. So even though
Yeah.
I can rip
Yeah.
it and copy it, I physically own the CD and I pay for the CD. So the CD itself, this is a virtual version of the exact same thing or a very similar thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so they see it's easy to explain, right? We don't have to come up with a 3-letter acronym to confuse everybody, but it's the same. It's like if you make it too easy, people will say, well, that's not unique and different. It's kind of like when podcasting first started.
It's true. Yeah.
Podcasting is MP3 files downloaded to your device, which kind of acted like radio. But if you call it radio, then no investors would invest in it, right? You have to come up with some crazy name like podcast, so people go, wow, that's something new. I'm going to throw some money into that. Anyway,
we need buzzwords, Chris.
Yeah, without buzzwords, we're nowhere. So your tool then, what does it actually create? I mean, what are these instantiated like? Is it just, does it allow you to create any kind of virtual object and then resell it, or is it specific kind?
No, so our platform basically is the connection point between the holder of the NFT and the brand or the marketer who's creating a reward.
Right.
So think of this as a way to sort of aggregate your audience into a single place and then distribute any kind of reward that you want to give them.
Right.
And so, in terms of how the platform works, it's very kind of workflow oriented. So you can create rewards. There's a process you go through to set up the different attributes of the reward, claim conditions, things like that. And then that gets populated onto a brandable dashboard where any of the holders of that NFT, any of the followers of that brand, they can go there. It's a public page. They can connect their wallet and verify which NFTs they own, and then they can see the rewards that they're eligible to claim.
Right. And the major difference between this and other loyalty programs is the NFT assures that the recipient actually owns or is that person, and they get the rewards.
Correct. Yeah, there's the ownership element. Where we think this gets pretty interesting, though, and where I think the industry is headed is getting back to this idea of creating these longer running relationships with your customer base, creating more engaging relationships. There's a couple of things that are happening in digital marketing. So one, we know that ad costs they're skyrocketing.
Oh yeah. It's ridiculous.
Right? Just because of saturation, because of consumer, we're just tired of ads. And it's getting a lot harder to target people. So, things like getting rid of third-party cookies and browsers are going to start to limit the way that marketers can actually find their audiences and target them, which is going to drive the cost up even further. The second element at play is this whole issue around digital privacy. So we all know about things like GDPR and CCPA and these really stringent requirements for tracking consent and making sure that we handle data the right way. So internally there's some risk associated with that. Strategic risk for a business. How much risk do you want to take in the data collection versus the benefit of being able to target that person?
Right.
And what's interesting about an NFT is the data can actually be attached to the metadata of the NFT. And so if I have a loyalty NFT, for instance, a membership card for all intents and purposes, and I'm shopping with a merchant, my NFT metadata can reflect my activity. And now as a consumer, I'm the one who's coming up and saying, you know what, I will offer my data in exchange for some sort of perk, some sort of reward. And it's a one-to-one relationship between the brand and the consumer instead of the brand going through an ad platform, which then is targeting me based on predictive behavior. And now I'm going to see that same ad for the next 3.5 years.
Right. So is this sort of a data privacy play as well then? Because that basically pushes the data to the customer and the customer has control over releasing it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the benefits that we see, as Web3 starts to take hold even further. I think that part of the narrative is actually going to be an important driver for growth.
But how do you stay away from all the sketchiness around Web3? Because they seem to lump in a whole bunch of like crypto and all sorts of other stuff, which are just kind of tainting the image of it. I mean, how do you stay away from that right now? I guess we just have to wait and see, or do you think there'll be some kind of a breakthrough?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, as builders, as marketers, as people that are, excited about this technology, I think we have a responsibility to educate and to be very, very aware of the terms that we're using. In the beginning, I think there was this tendency to kind of lump crypto and NFTs and Web3 and all of this stuff together.
And blockchain. Don't forget blockchain.
Don't forget on the blockchain. Everything on the blockchain, right? Yeah.
And it's funny because I used to work I did some work with a couple banks, and whenever they heard blockchain, they heard crypto. And I'm like, no, they're completely different things. You can use the blockchain without creating crypto, because they wanted to stay away from crypto because it was, to them, it was like poison at the time. But
Absolutely.
there's plenty of opportunities for blockchain that could be used. So separating those two out and seeing that they're completely different is, that was a tough slog to get that happening. And now I know that financial services companies are using blockchain, and some of them are actually looking at minting their own coins and stuff like that. But it's funny, this everything was conflagrated together, and now we have to sort of separate it so that everyone will understand there's lots of useful stuff here.
Yeah. And so, I think that responsibility really does fall on the builders in the beginning. It's up to us to really clarify, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about crypto? Is this some other just technological aspect of Web3?
Yeah.
So, first responsibility on the builders. I think there's also, in the beginning, Web3 started as a movement that was, like most technologies, it was a lot of builders. It was a lot of developers, technologists, people that actually just really enjoyed the technology side, and which tends to create really, or just say, unpolished user experiences.
Well said.
To put it nicely. And if you're using those, if you're an early adopter, there's a lot of pain there, because you have to navigate through a lot of complexity, and you have to understand a lot of terms, et cetera. I think what we're starting to see now, and this is something that Reddit did really well with their digital avatar launch, is we're starting to obfuscate that technology from the consumer, but in a way that doesn't necessarily sacrifice the benefit, the underlying benefit of the technology. Right. So when you created a digital avatar with your Reddit account, that was or is an NFT. Most people, and they've minted like 6.5 million of these things, so that's pretty significant. Most people who minted didn't realize that it was an NFT. They were just decorating their avatar.
Well, that's exactly how it should be, because
it's how it should be,
average consumer, the average Redditor is like,
exactly.
What? I don't need to know that.
Yeah, exactly.
I have an avatar. That's all I need to know, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think product managers will appreciate that aspect of this challenge. It's like, you don't need to understand a transmission to drive a car. And so I think that's, the second part of how we can help people get past some of the stigma associated with crypto without without losing out on the benefits of this technology. Side note to all of this, obviously crypto last year, end of 2022, had a horrible PR experience. We had FTX, we had all of the crashes.
You should be a diplomat. Do you have training in diplomacy? Because you're really good.
No, I just work in crypto. So I think we were actually, as an industry, I think we were really nervous, but also just upset. There's been a lot of technology progress over the past 2.5 years, and a lot of people who have really just full force dedicated their professional lives to making sure this technology goes somewhere. And to see it kind of get cast to the side over this, stuff happening with SBF and everything, it's kind of heartbreaking, to be honest, as a builder in the space. What's been encouraging, though, is the conversations I've had, particularly with businesses, so mainly marketers who are looking at this tech. They see that that's actually just the actions of a person, right? It was a centralized exchange. It was a bad actor. And thankfully, I think we're getting to a point with this technology that people are starting to think, maybe this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So let's not write it off because of one or two bad apples.
Right. Yeah. Well, we need more success stories in that space. I think that's Absolutely. What we need to do. And there's always, this is the thing I always like to say about the news. The news, if it's on the news, it means it hardly ever happens. Right. Nobody gets that. They think that, it's on the news and it just keeps repeating over and over again, so it must be happening everywhere. It's like, no, that means doesn't happen, because if it happened all the time, it wouldn't be news. Right.
News is by definition exception reporting. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you think about it that way, then you realize, all this hullabaloo. But you never know. It's like there's all sorts of actors in the space that, what it's like with innovation. They like it the way it is because everyone's making money in their little piece of it. But if you go in there and try to disrupt things and say, well, maybe we don't need to spend so much money on XYZ, and these players start getting afraid that their income is going to drop or they're going to lose their market share, they'll, throw some FUD in there saying, You know, it's only criminals that use this stuff, but we
Right.
all know we know what's really happening underneath it all.
Well, so maybe my experience in an internal incubator was actually good training ground,
Yeah,
because the same
exactly.
thing happened. You know, we had incumbents, but they were just internal products.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good. So you really did go to the dark side though. Like what why did you leave UX? I mean, were you thinking that things were better on the product management side, or I'm curious as to
No,
what drove you to make that transition.
you know what it was. I spent a lot of time on the UX side. I spent a lot of time on design discovery, on design research,
Hmm.
on early ideation. So I'm admittedly the world's worst UI designer. Don't ask me to design any kind of user interface.
Well, I thought
And
if you're in the UX space, you'd be an amazing designer. Like you could
no,
not
no, no, no.
necessarily.
There are amazing interface designers, and then there are UX people.
Oh,
I'm more the
okay.
UX
Those aren't the
person, right?
same.
So,
Okay.
no, 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 no. I think about the questions to ask. I synthesize the answers into
Oh,
something
all right.
meaningful. But so in on the UX side of my career, that's where I was spending my time. And what I realized is that a lot of that upfront work, the insights that I was seeing through the research and the ideation that I was doing, and really it's customer development at some
Hmm.
level. Um, it was it wasn't being filtered into product decision making,
Hmm.
and it was frustrating, to be honest. I
Yeah.
wanted to, and it's not an ego thing. It's not that I want to put my stamp on things. It's that I genuinely want to see better products in the world. I
Hmm.
genuinely want to see better experiences, and I realized that a lot of that has to come from the product core in the
Right.
business in a lot of
Right.
companies. And so
Right.
when that opportunity came along, actually my manager and mentor at the time, kind of pushed me along and said, I think you'd be really good at this, and I think you should give it a shot. And so I did. And thanks to him for giving me that opportunity. But it did really open my eyes to another side of product thinking. I think, and so it's given me this new appreciation for the strategic side, for the quantitative side, the analysis side of how do you make product decisions in a way that's going to balance well for the business and for the users that you're serving.
Hmm.
So really it was just I think a desire to want to have a little bit more influence over where the product was going, and then I saw an opportunity to learn some new skills and just become a more well-rounded product person.
Right. But don't you think UX is more important than that? I mean, we need to do what the customer wants, right? Oh yeah, yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So when you were working in those internal incubators, did you have a situation where you were able to get any of those products out the door? And then if so, how did you do it? I mean, how did you break through those barriers?
Yeah, so we were working on kind of greenfield opportunities for incremental product enhancements. So
Hmm.
not like a net new line of business, not a net new product, but looking at our product and saying, how can we expand this and grow geometrically?
Right.
And so we did a lot of experimentation. That was a pretty big theme in the lab that we worked together in, is test and learn. Like, we have to
Hmm.
experiment. So we took a very lean approach, and did a lot of early experimentation with our ideas. Really kind of calling our shots when it came to what are we looking for in validation.
Hmm.
Trying to be as clear as possible that we needed to get a signal from the market or from our customer base, that we're targeting, that this is a good idea.
Right.
And I think in innovation, there's always this push-pull tension between wanting to create net new and just realizing when some ideas aren't the right idea.
Right.
Right. And so that's the tough part of validation. And that's, I think that's why a lot of people skip it, to be honest. They
Just get
Nobody
it out
wants
the
to call their
door,
baby
see if they
ugly.
want
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Thankfully, I think product orgs are starting to mature a lot more. And there's probably
Yeah.
less of that happening now. But
Hmm.
so a lot of the core insights that we took from those experiments did filter back into our product,
Hmm.
not as net new product, but as new ways to frame what we were doing, new ways to position the product for usage, new ways to create, packaging for the product.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Because
yeah,
if you ask me, I mean, that's where the real value comes from. But you can't. It's just not measurable, right? I mean,
right,
how you can say
right.
these things came out of it, but how can you go back and say, okay, here's the ROI on these specific things that we were able to learn? I mean, it's almost impossible.
It's difficult. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
we definitely did try to do that. We looked at things like, how can we start attaching retention and usage to some of these ideas that we're filtering back into the product. And you can do that to an extent, but
Hmm.
when you have a complex product, it was a B2B product. And so when you have a complex product, it's one, difficult to measure that in a meaningful way sometimes. It's hard to correlate those metrics in a way that can directly be tied to a particular insight or innovation. And two, there's always politicking that happens around
Hmm.
products, right? So who's going to get the credit essentially?
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of politicking, I wanted to ask you, so have you read the book The Best Interface is No Interface?
I haven't, but that sounds
Golden
familiar. I think
Krishna?
of no,
Yeah.
no.
And his basically his idea was, things shouldn't have an interface at all. Like, for example, he
Sure.
was talking about a door unlocking app, right? So you walk up to the door, you put your key in, turn it, and go in, right?
Yeah.
And you for a door unlocking app, you'd have to call up the app and enter the code, and it's just you have to add a lot of interface to make an interface happen. And his contention was that our interfaces should just disappear, right? We should
Yeah.
have no interfaces at all. I mean, what do you think of that? What do you think of that concept? Do you think it's something that's coming, or you think we're going to step
I
away from that?
No, I think it is. I think it's going to be a while. It's hard to put timelines on things because, the interesting thing about innovation is one innovation can unlock another
Hmm.
and really fast forward the pace of adoption in ways that we didn't expect. Things like Wi-Fi and mobile phones,
Yeah.
app usage and smart, like all of these things are complementary, or they can be. But I think, this idea of is that concept called NUI?
Yeah.
Natural user interface, I think,
Hmm.
is the term that I've seen out there.
Hmm.
It's a fascinating concept. A few things have to happen though, and I do think that things like blockchain are a component of this. You have to have a network of networks that can talk to each other in very seamless ways.
Yeah.
So as you're walking around the world, your activity and your needs as a user can't just be attached to one single organization, one single network. Like, you really need this layer of interoperability,
Yeah.
protocol layer that doesn't exist today. Blockchain is a piece of that, right? Because it does give us a place to log transactions, to verify ownership of data, verify transactions, things like that. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. The other thing that needs to come together then would be responsiveness in things like Internet of Things,
Mm.
in a much different way. So
There's a
Internet of
term I
Things.
haven't heard in a while. IoT.
Yeah, yeah, IoT, right?
It's all happening, but nobody, because everything's been washed out by AI and ChatGPT. But go on.
So smart things, right? Smart
Yeah.
objects. Today, they're not really that smart.
Mm.
There's still a lot of programmatic interaction, and
Yeah. I don't know
and
why they call them smart objects, because they're not really smart. If you ask me, they're just network connected, right?
they're
They
network
have
connected, right?
they're network
Yeah.
connected, but they call them smart even though they really aren't. But go on.
The extent of intelligence in those devices is like, if this then that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Exactly.
but I think where this starts to get interesting is, so let's say we have a base layer, an interoperable base layer that includes things like blockchain, so we can
Hmm.
seamlessly move data and activity from one place to another. Let's say that we have devices now that can plug into layers, and not just a single layer, but can respond to data on multiple layers.
Hmm.
And now let's combine that with uh, AI technology or AI enhanced technology that can basically predict our needs and interact with our needs in a real time way. So, maybe the Nest knows that I'm in or out of the house on a certain schedule,
Hmm.
but the device of the future is it's going to be able to respond to my needs, right? Maybe it's going to
Yeah.
be able to interact with my health data to know that I'm feeling a little sick, and it's going to be able to adjust the temperature and
Hmm.
just really start accommodating the user in ways that the user doesn't even have to ask for. And that's when I think something like an organic interface gets really interesting.
Yeah. Well, that would be, but that I think a big concern that people would have is privacy. Like, who am I going to give my health information to, and who's going to
You're
make the decision? I don't have my own personal AI yet. Amazon Health or whoever is going to find out that I am under the weather, and so how do we? I mean, if we had a blockchain and personal AIs, that would be solved. But how do we get there?
So I feel like you're just teeing this up for me. Yeah, since we're in the land of imagination, and if we can
Yes, the
just
land of
wave the
make
magic
believe.
wand, yeah. One of the concerns with blockchains right now is that with the public blockchain, that data is readable by anybody,
Yep.
right? So I'm not going to put sensitive data on the blockchain that's going to compromise my identity or anything like that. But there's an emerging technology, an emergent discipline in blockchain called zero knowledge proofs.
Mm.
And zero knowledge proofs basically allow us to post data to the blockchain that isn't disclosed but can be
Mm.
verified,
Hmm.
right? So we can allow people to verify aspects of that data without actually giving them the data. And a
Oh,
very simple
interesting.
example would be, let's say you're trying to verify somebody's age, rather than showing them that you're 26 years old like me, we can just that was a joke, by the way.
I knew a guy who he would always misrepresent his age on Facebook. So he was like 82 or something like that.
Perpetually.
Yeah, exactly. He kept upping it every year.
Yeah. So rather than going and verifying that you're 26,
Mm-hmm.
we can flip that question around and just say, are you of age?
Right.
Right. And, are you over X age? And without disclosing the actual age, we can answer the question for the person trying to verify that data. And
Right.
that's the underlying premise with zero knowledge proofs, is that there are ways to verify the authenticity, the accuracy of data without necessarily disclosing the data.
Excellent.
I think the other thing that's coming are going to be like semi-private chains. So these would be blockchains running on top of public blockchains. So these could be what are called layer twos or side chains. But basically, let's say that I'm a healthcare organization and I want to spin up a healthcare data chain so that, my providers and my pharmacists can all use this data so that my subscribers don't have to fill out that same information at 10 different doctor's offices like we all
Yeah, that
do.
would be great. That's like Nirvana. Maybe that's
Right.
me.
So we could actually run a chain on top of a public chain. So that secondary chain, which would be the healthcare chain, would be private to the participants, right?
Mm-hmm.
So only privileged actors would be able to read data from that chain. But then the activity on that chain could basically be underwritten or guaranteed by a blockchain.
Mm.
And the reason you would want to do that is so that you can minimize the risk of a bad actor on that secondary chain, somebody
Right.
inside of the healthcare company or something manipulating data or using that data in an inappropriate way. You can
Right.
instead you basically check in with a main public chain, and that's one way to kind of guarantee both
Oh,
or satisfy
nice.
both conditions.
How
Yeah.
far away are we from that, or are people already doing that?
So one of the big blockchains out there, Polygon, has been working on a Polygon zero knowledge proof of concept for a while, and they recently launched in beta. And so I think we're still probably a few years out from mass adoption of that within the blockchain world, but I think it's coming a lot quicker than we think it is, because as people start waking up to this concept of there's a benefit to having our data in our control, but being
Mm-hmm.
able to plug into this base interoperable layer. I think that's going to accelerate this desire to put more and more information onto chain and do that in a secure way.
Yeah. Well, I did a project with the World Economic Forum back maybe in 2010, 2009. We were talking about personal data stores because that's when Facebook had their first big data breach. And everyone
Right.
was like, "Oh my God, this is the worst possible thing. People are going to want to own their data." And then it just went away. It just disappeared. So how do we get people to understand that this is a good thing, owning your own data?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it has probably to do with the narrative around data ownership. So,
Mm.
10 years ago, there, breaches have been happening forever, but 10
Oh
years ago,
yeah.
I don't think there was as much public visibility into the bad things that can happen when your private information is out there, with these third parties.
Right.
We've also in the past decade been the product. We are the product in things.
We're still the product.
We're in things like social networks, and I think
Yeah.
we're starting to realize the backlash of like, oh, I'm never going to be able to get my data out of that system, and it's constantly going to be used to target me, or it's going to be sold to other systems that are going to target me. So I
Yeah.
think just the cultural awareness or the societal awareness of the impacts of data ownership are starting to increase,
Mm-hmm.
which could be a driving factor. Timing is everything with innovation.
Oh yeah.
You look at the Segway, right? It's always the example of the product that flopped when you're looking at
Yeah.
innovation
Yeah.
textbooks and things like that.
Yeah.
But you fast forward today and you look at the Lime scooter,
Yeah.
right? And you
Yeah.
look at all of the e-devices that are coming out for, electric personal transportation.
Yeah.
A lot of these ideas just need time, and it's the right time at the right place.
Yeah. Well, I've always said everything is going to happen. The only question is when. We just don't know
Exactly.
when it's going to
Yeah.
happen. If you knew when it was going to happen, then we'd all be billionaires. But
I was going to say, if I knew when, I wouldn't be building products. I'd just be investing.
that's right. Awesome. So it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2033. 10 years from now, where do you think we're going to be in your space in 10 years?
In the Web3 space
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah. Well,
So
whatever. Web3 or your customers. I mean, paint the picture of the world in 10 years.
sure. So in 10 years, I think that we do get to this next stage of interoperability.
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of our data siloed inside of these single organizations is going to feel antiquated, kind of the way that storing files on your computer without the cloud feels today.
Right.
Right. And today that's we expect that. It's table stakes. It's on
Mm-hmm.
my computer. It should be on my phone. I think we're going to feel the same way about data portability. So as consumers, we're going to say, like, there's no reason why I can only access my pictures and social data inside of that platform. It's going to be everywhere. So I think we're going to see data at scale in a much more portable way. I think that one of the things that's a friction point right now in the space is this concept of a wallet. And so today, if you want to buy and sell crypto, or if you want to participate in the NFT side of things, you generally need a wallet of some sort. And a wallet is basically just your crypto container. It holds your digital items. And right now, the wallet is sort of thought about as this ride-along product, right? It sits in your browser as an extension, or it's a mobile app. Yeah. What I think we're going to actually see is that the wallet will supplant the browser. And the wallet will actually become our primary interface for things like blockchain and digital assets. And, digging into the metaverse side of things, right now, everybody's wrapped up in this idea that we're all going to put on a HoloLens and we're, going to go to the future.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. I don't know about you. That doesn't sound fun to me.
No.
Yeah. There's one person on my team who's really excited about that. And I'm like, why?
Yeah,
that sounds like a perpetual neck ache.
Yeah.
But I do think that what will start to come to fruition around the metaverse side of things is that when the wallet becomes the browser, and when we have base layer interoperability and we have data portability at scale, now our web experiences are going to start to look a lot different. We're going to have a much more fluid experience moving between apps, digital properties. It's not going to feel like I have to go to this website and log in and do this thing, and then go over here and do this thing. The idea that we were talking about with the organic interface, a lot of that is about predicting user needs and kind of just in time controls for the interface.
Exactly. And I think that's
context
is missing amongst all of this stuff. And
absolutely,
it's not like they can't put it in there. They know everything about you. It's like everything they know where I am, they know what I'm doing, they know all of this stuff. But if for some reason the context isn't surfaced, they're using it,
right?
But they're not using it to help us. But anyway, I'm ranting.
No,
go on.
No. It's a great point. It is about context, and I think when we are able to own and control our data in a way that benefits us, there will probably be a shift in the way that we think about business models, and we're going to move away from this idea of platform as king, and think more about how do we add value on top of the user's data instead of how do we become the user's data.
Right.
And that's going to take a while, right? And I think that's probably the next generation of big players in the tech space are probably going to come from Alpha or Gen Z, where this mentality, I think, is
have you heard the new term? Zalpha.
Zalpha. Nice. I've not heard that.
I just heard it this morning. I thought, oh my God.
Yeah. That's a good Zalpha.
We have to do things for Zalpha.
Yeah. There's another thing that's happening that I think will be interesting, which is, in the Web3 space, there's this notion of community participation. And right now, because we're so good at words and acronyms, we're calling that a DAO, a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization.
Yep.
It's a community with shared resources, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the heart of what these things
Yeah.
are.
There we go again, creating a new term to make the investors happy.
We
That we're doing
need
something new.
buzzwords, Chris.
The
Yes,
more buzzwords and acronyms we can create, the better.
absolutely. So I think that that philosophy of community participation is actually going to start creeping into business. Not in a way that
Interesting.
it's going to be, not in the way that it's going to be, everybody gather around and create a product, because that's probably going to be a big mess too. But I think the idea of elevating your community, your customers to a different level of stakeholder importance will start to take hold. And I think, even as far as the incentives that businesses start building into their core business models, right now, a lot of times the consumer, outside of obtaining the product, doesn't benefit from the company's success,
Yeah.
right? I get an iPhone, but unless I own Apple stock, like I'm not really, I don't get anything for being a 30-year Apple customer.
Yeah. Or I'm creating podcasts so that Apple can fill out their library of podcasts and make it attractive to people to listen to, but I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm just getting, like, they're using me as a distribution platform. They're getting my content for nothing, and I'm getting nothing for my content.
Exactly. And so I think we're going to see some more balance there. I hope we see more balance there in the next 10 years where we, the creators, the people who are putting the energy and the time into creating these experiences, are going to be more fairly compensated and going to be, first-class citizens when it comes to even designing the business models around how you create community and products together.
Yeah, because like I said, I mean, I think we're being leveraged by all these companies. Like you said, we're the product. We're creating all this content, and they're using it, but they're monetizing it, and we're not. If there was some way to, it's like your YouTube. You have to have X number of subscribers before you get to an advertising model. It's like, that's ridiculous. I mean, how many? We have micro communities all over the place, and they all should be incentivized for their content creation. But it's almost like content creation. It's like music, art. Anytime we're creating something artistic that sort of touches your soul and is amazingly sort of powerful, we feel like it's not worth anything. I don't get it. I mean, it should be worth more than other things. But anyway.
Well, maybe that'll be a positive societal outcome from the next 10 years. We'll reevaluate the value that we assign to things like creative output, which actually, I think will be an interesting side effect of systems like ChatGPT.
Right.
Because we look at things like OpenAI, we look at things like Midjourney, and it's getting really easy now to create some impressive results. So how are we going to differentiate as human creators from what the machine can do? Or how are we going to work with the machine to create something net new, better, that actually still creates an emotional response?
Yeah. Yeah. Although I think that I don't think we have to worry too much, because people who are going to spend money on art will still spend money on art. They're not going to sort of dumb down and go to Midjourney or DALL-E or whatever. It's those people who weren't going to spend money on art anyway, and that we're just going to use free images on the internet. They're the ones who are going to like, I want to create a blog post picture, because people like blog posts, pictures, whatever.
Right.
Anyway, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
You can follow me personally on Twitter. I'm at Nick Casares. It's NickCasares. And you can find our company at Step3. That's step number 3.io.
Wow, you got an IO domain. That's cool.
We did.
Those are expensive, right? The IO domains. That's what I heard.
Hit and miss. Depends on. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. I'll put your information in the show notes if anybody gets in touch with you. So that's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.